Welcome to Pigeon Racing World with Winners One. Before we start tonight's show, I'd like to thank the Pigeon fraternity for supporting our programs. Beyond Channel 31, on YouTube and Facebook, we now have people watch the show from all 4 points of the globe. In Brisbane, we have Dave Christensen. G'day, David.
Hi Rod, hi viewers. If you live outside of Melbourne and can't view Channel 31 live on television, you can watch it on their website or simply subscribe to Winners One YouTube channel and receive up-to-date programs and features. On tonight's show, when Rod and I were in Sydney filming the Pippa auction birds, we travelled north to Newcastle to visit Malcolm and Richard Clements. In the last part of the program, we continue with Dr. Colin Walker's studio interview.
David, it was great to catch up with Mel and Richard. Their loft has become one of the strongest out of Newcastle in New South Wales. This is their interview. We're here in Newcastle with Richard and Mel Clement.
Richard and Mel, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
And Malcolm, we'll start off with you. We're here in your backyard with a very modest loft. How long have you been here?
In this actual location about 10 years, and prior to that I've had several moves and I've always had the birds, but the last 10 years I've raced here.
And you've always been in this local area?
Yes, I've always been in the Newcastle area. My parents emigrated to Australia when I was 9 years old, and I saw pigeons for the first time in my life at 5 years of age, and I was fascinated, and I watched the flock flying and I followed them home, and it turned out one of the kids from school, it was his father that raced pigeons, and I went to that yard and I saw pigeons, that was it, I wanted them. And one of my earliest recollections in life was getting a pair of red checkers off this guy, and like many areas that small land mass, high population, we lived in tenements, so there was no backyard to keep birds in, so I snuck them in the cardboard box under my bed. And I had them there for a couple of days and feed them scraps and whatnot. Then of a night time I'd go home and go inside the bedroom and let them out for a fly, and Dad walked in and there's a pair of red jackets flying around the bedroom. Well, I got a kick in the tail and I had to get rid of them, but I didn't. I searched around. There was a couple of older boys than me, 4 or 5 years older than me, and they had an allotment not real far from me, about a mile away from where I lived, and I took the birds to them, and I used to go up there every afternoon after school. And at 9-year-old we come out here to Australia, and I immediately got the pigeons again. Dad built me a little cage, and I carried on from them. I started racing at 15 years of age, and I've raced virtually ever since. Yeah, that's about.
And I don't know if you can see in the background of the cameras, but the lofts are quite modest and they're tucked on either side of the sheds.
Yeah, I haven't got much choice in the matter. It's a 10.5 by 10.5 square metre shed, so I have to go either side, one side for the stock birds and one side for the race birds, so that's how it's built. You've got no choice in it. You know?
There's no issues, or is there any issues you had to deal with to do it that way?
Well, yeah, I prefer the birds to be facing the north, but there's only a very small proportion of the loft faces north. The rest of it is facing east, and yeah. So, but the birds seem to go okay, so I can't argue. Yeah. They come out of here every day. They'll be, you know.
Richard, you've obviously grown up in the pigeons. Can you tell us where your involvement when it started and your involvement now?
Yeah, I was lucky, Rod, that I probably grew up with the pigeons and was born into them, and flew as a junior and always liked them as a kid. When my wife and I bought our first house, we built a loft and raced ourselves for a few years, and then when I started studying more and work took me away and I was travelling a lot and I was in the state or overseas, I had about a 10-year gap where I didn't race at all. And then when we moved back to Newcastle, got back involved again with Dad, and really been flying as a partnership probably since about 2012 to today, again in this sort of what I'd call the third phase.
We were up to all hours last night just talking all things pigeons, and you said that when you left home you were going to change a few things that your dad did, and you learnt some lessons. What were those lessons you learnt?
Yeah, well, I went out, and I think like most young guys, the first year that I flew myself, I was pretty sure I was going to win everything, and I won nothing. And I had a bit of a disaster of a year actually, and ran out of pigeons before the Young Bird Derby, the 300-mile mark. So it kind of worked out. I'd probably missed all the 1 or 2 percenters. So I could do all the basics, but there was a lot of stuff I'd missed. So I went back home the following year and flew partnership again, and really that was probably more of an apprenticeship than anything else. I think the first 15 years I just cruised along and relied on Dad doing all the work, and then had another year back flying at home, and then went back to my own loft the following year, and yeah, it was completely different. So it just picked up a lot of little things and a lot of sort of, particularly around medication and feeding, that I probably wasn't doing the first year that I flew myself, and it made a massive difference.
One of the things we talked about was pulling the grit out on a Thursday night. What other things did you learn on your apprenticeship?
I was probably working the birds too hard for what I was feeding them and asking a bit too much. So they're probably going into the races and they'd already peaked. So it was really about just getting that balance with what I was feeding them and the amount of work I was expecting them to do. That was the biggest thing that I probably picked up. I was tossing way too much, and I was just expecting way too much out of them, driving them too hard, flagging them pretty hard, which we'd never done here previously. So I really went away and reviewed sort of how I got them ready for the race, so that they were peaking on the Saturday, not Wednesday type thing. That's probably the biggest thing, Dave.
And Malcolm, you're big into feed.
Oh, well, like anyone else, we all have a little idiosyncrasies and ideas, but I over the past it's evolved over a number of years. I know years ago, like many flyers, in my early days, I'm told when I was in my 20s and whatnot, it was a big thing to feed peas. And we used to feed up to 40% peas in the mix. It was a standard thing. Nowadays, we sort of consider peas lead sinkers, you know, but I still give mine some, but nowhere near the amount I used to. And I try to balance it out, you know, like a heavy to a light mix toward the end of the week. And unlike a lot of people, I don't use a lot of barley. Most do, I don't. But I do use some, but not much.
And what do you use the barley for?
So I know when the birds have had enough. When they start to walk away, you know they've had a gutful. You know, that they're only eating what they want to eat, not what they should eat, you know. Plus, I think a little bit of barley has some additives or nutrients in it that is beneficial to the birds. And I maintain a little bit of it, you know, but that's how it is.
And you said you feed heavier at the beginning of the week and lighter towards it?
No, the other way around.
Lighter at the beginning of the week?
Yep, and heavier toward the end of it. And why I say that, in my belief is when the birds come home, like, as everyone would agree, you give them a light feed because they overtax their energy sort of thing. And then the next couple of days you keep on a light feed so that they get rid of that lactic acid sort of thing. And toward the end of the week you give them the carbohydrates. But I use Rod's mix of a Tuesday and Wednesday night if I'm on a light feed. I use the Winners 1 formula that Rod supplied us with, and that brings up the protein levels as far as I'm concerned. In the earlier part, if they've lost any body during the race, they can put it back on. And then they're Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, if it's a Friday basket, and you know they get a lot more carbohydrate as an energy mix.
And do you feed roughly the same, or do you look to see if it's a hard race and feed them differently, or if it's a fast race, feed them differently?
No, I don't think I'm that clever. I feed to what the birds seem to want. You know, I mean, on a colder day, they will eat more than what they do in a warm day. I mean, that's common sense. But when I feed them, if there's one or two got the drinker, I know they've had enough. That does it for me. And
do you handle the birds and change the mix?
No, I certainly handle the birds plenty, and feel if they're light and buoyant or whether they're heavy and leady, you know. So no.
But if they're heavy and leady, do you change the mix to what you normally feed?
No. I carry on with what I'm doing because I know it's worked for me, and I try to stick to the one thing.
Yeah.
You know? And it seems to be all right. And if they feel that a little bit leady by the time they go to a race, it's conditioned them up for the next race and lost any extra fat or whatever. But I know it's always a bit of an issue. I could be different to a lot of guys, that when the birds are first reared and they go into the race loft, I keep up the heavy mix as if it were a breeding mix for quite some time, because I do believe that they're still growing bodies, and particularly when it comes to the molt, they need that protein to grow the feathers. But you've got to be careful. As one good flyer pointed out to me one time, if you feed them over too much, they're not light and buoyant, they don't get up in the air and fly much, and the overall thing, it's much harder to shift beef than shift fat when you want to get them moving. So, you know, you just got to have that, you know, balance in between. And that's what I try to do. That's my book here, and this is only, everything I do. You know, suddenly birds give them plain water, I let out 50% forced to fly, and understand me because of the molt, and and I put down what they did on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and everything. You know, falcon attack. But, yeah, so that's exactly what I do. I write everything down and know where I stand.
Yeah, g'day guys, Richard Clements from the NCF Federation in Newcastle, flying partnership with my father Malcolm up here, and just wanted to comment today on a product that we've been using over the last couple of seasons called Protein Plus, which we sourced from Winners 1 in Victoria. Protein Plus is a product that we started using in our stock loft as a trial product a couple of years ago. we were interested in how we could ensure that when our youngsters had those last few days in the nest before they went into the race loft, and as they went into the race loft didn't lose any body and condition. And we found that the product was particularly helpful with that, and we were very happy with our first trials. We used it then a little bit more in the stock loft and found that over time our pigeons, particularly as they went into the third and fourth round of breeding, weren't losing body and were still in really good condition at the end of the breeding season. So that was really a positive for us in the first year. Last year we used it in the race loft for the first time. We found it to be a really good product to help put condition back onto the birds and to help the birds build back up a little bit quicker than what they probably previously would have, without having to change their feed base too much, particularly early in the week. We've had a pretty successful couple of years up here, winning multiple club and combine and federation averages, and last year particularly was a record-breaking year for us, and we put some of that success down to the fact that we've been able to use this product consistently now, and we'd have no hesitation in recommending it for other flyers who want to try and aid that recovery period, particularly after a hard race or a hard toss.
I've asked this question to you, Richard. A few years back you had birds stolen. Can you want to talk about that?
Not really. Look, I think the sports pages, yeah, we had some pigeons stolen from the loft, and it's disappointing. There's some low individuals in every sport and in every hobby that you take up. We moved on pretty quickly from it. In the end, was it a good or a bad thing? It probably drove us, Rod, to look at imports, because we'd lost, you know, the key pigeons in the family that we'd had. And it's disappointing. It had to be someone that knew the birds, that knew the loft, and so it's someone that we've welcomed into the house. And I think we're a bit more cautious now. And you know, I don't have too many people in the yard anymore. There's only a few people that we allow to come on race day and things like that. And if people want to come and look at the birds, I generally say Dad's a bit more accommodating than me, but the loft's a bit more secure now. We've got cameras and things that link to phones and stuff like that. But yeah, it's disappointing. It's part of the sport. We're not the only ones that's had it, Rod, but yeah, it did change probably our approach to what we had in the loft moving forward.
Well, in that theft, there was exactly 5 birds taken, and all 5 of them were guaranteed producers, multiple winners of themselves and guaranteed producers, the best we had. So someone knew the birds intimately and took exactly the right birds. Rather frustrating. Yeah.
It's very disappointing because, as you say, they've been here, they know your birds. I remember Owen Petrie having a similar thing a few years back, and you know, he wrote that it had to be someone who'd been in his loft, knew his birds because they knew which ones to take. In his case, fortunately, a lot of his birds were locked away and they couldn't get to them, but it does happen.
I think the disappointing thing is it helps, like if you have new flyers come in and want to come and have a look, I'm really cautious. And it probably is a disadvantage that, you know, we don't have that sort of open loft policy anymore, and we won't go back there. Yeah, look, it's one of those things. It was quite a few years ago now, and you know, I would have loved to have worked out who it was, Rod, and I think you can always have your suspicions, and you're better just to let it go and move on, and that's what we did.
So how did you bounce back to be so successful? And we'll talk about your success in a minute.
Well, it affected us greatly. Now, I wasn't living here at the time. I was living in a place called Seahampton. It's more of a rural thing. It was probably 10, 15 kilometres from here. But, and I did suffer in the next year or two. You know, I couldn't get the success. And it took us a few years to bounce back. And it was Richard that got involved and bought a few of the imports, and particularly some from you. And a couple of them have been outstanding stock pigeons for us, and I flew in the Lake Macquarie Combine where I fly to this day, and it was my 3rd year flying there before I won a race because of that setback. And then Richard got involved more heavily with me, and by the 3rd year he'd brought in these imports and we crossed them in with our own and just took off like a shot, and we've held her on. I've managed to win the combine average the last 6 years straight, so in about 4 different directions, I think it is. So
I think you're right. It was good that it meant we had to look at different pigeons, and the imports, this is sort of 2011, 2012, 2013, were new to me, having come back and just got re-involved, and so tried them all. To be honest, bought from just about every stud in Australia. I don't think there'd be many people I didn't buy pigeons from, and tried all the families. And basically just thought, well, I'd bring in a heap and see what worked for us with our methods and our process, and it sort of went from there. And I genuinely think they were faster pigeons than we'd had previously, particularly up to about maybe 300 mile. And we just slowly bought in more and more, and then what worked for us, we went and just then established a new family of pigeons based around the imported sprint pigeons predominantly.
So you said you bought birds from here, there and everywhere, so what advice would you give to someone who was following a similar path to you? What?
Don't do any of that. Honestly, I probably spent, I don't know, I wouldn't say but I bought a lot of pigeons online without handling them and seeing them, and I bought them on pedigree and reputation. I'm sure I got caught a few times. I'm sure there's some pigeons that arrived that maybe weren't exactly what I thought I'd bought. So yeah, I bought lots of pigeons from lots of different studs. I don't think there'd be a stud that I didn't buy from, and I think every ad that I saw, I was looking at pigeons. I went to nearly every sale that I could get to, and I bought a lot of pigeons that I wouldn't bring into my loft again. I got to a point where I said, we bought some from Rod, and they'd started to show pretty good results, significantly better than what we sort of had expected. So I decided to fly down to Melbourne, and that was really the approach that I take now. If I see some pigeons I like, I'll jump on a plane and fly down, and I'm lucky that I can do that both financially and time-wise. And I'll spend a day at Rod's or a day wherever I'm going, and but I don't buy too many more now. I've bought the direct imports obviously in, there's quite a few of them down there, but yeah, I wouldn't do it again. I'd probably do what everyone says, go and find a good flyer, form a relationship, go at the end of the season and try and get pigeons that he's got left over out of his better stuff. Try and get some eggs. You'll get eggs a lot cheaper than youngsters, and if I was starting again, if I was coming in and wanting to do what we did, make that step change, I'd probably stick to one or two families rather than, I tried all of them, Coopermans, Vanderbilts, the whole lot. Gabby Vanderbilts, I don't think there was a strain I didn't try in the loft, and then once we worked out what we wanted and set on it, that's how I'd do it again this time. I wouldn't go through all that process. I'd just go to the local flyers and say, what are you winning with? And I'd just concentrate on that. The pigeons we've got at the moment are very robust. They crossed into our pigeons really well, and I think that was the bonus. And most of them are Allen Petrie, Herriman sort of based, and more recently we've just brought in all the Vanderbilts. We tried a couple of those, and they were really good, really good actually. So we just sort of let's go in. So we went in pretty big with Timmy Fairfax and Blue Crows, and we bought a heap of them and bought a heap of imports in, and we'll see how they go in the next 18 months.
We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back to Pigeon Racing World with Winners 1. We continue with Mel and Richard Clements. Out of those birds that you have purchased, what, obviously we know, I think everyone's heard of Top Shelf.
Yep.
What other birds have you got there, and what's their sort of achievements?
So we bought, how we ended up with the imports, we bought a couple, we bought them from everywhere as I said, and then we started racing small numbers of them. In the first few weeks we were racing them, this pigeon, Top Shelf pigeons were sort of in a couple of minutes in front of anything else on the day, and we'd had a few, 3 or 4 years where we hadn't won a combine. All of a sudden we were winning 3 and 4 in a row. So the pigeons that have done really well for us, Top Shelf's probably produced, I don't really know now, right over 20 combine winners, or as a sire or grandsire, and Maid Marion's an Allen Petrie pigeon. She's produced 9 and multiple fed winners each. So when those pigeons did so well early, we went and bought more of the Herrimans, both from yourself and other studs, and obviously bought a couple in. The Herrimans would be the base of most of the pigeons now, and the Petries are through just about everything. So we've spent the last 5 years really building around those 2 or 3 key pigeons. Every year I like to bring in at least 2 or 3 more, and they get about 1.5 to 2 seasons to show me if they've got anything, and if they haven't, I'll go and just replace them. But we have brought in some really good pigeons related to the syndicate cock and the stuff that Mel Coulston originally had out of South Australia. They've crossed in really well with ours. Probably over the last 18 months they've been pretty successful at a little bit further.
Now, Top Shelf's a cross.
Yep.
What's your view on having a cross in your stock loft?
Probably didn't want it when I first got him, if I'm honest, and I bid on 3 pigeons in an auction, and I was going overseas with work for a couple of days, and I won all 3, and if I'm honest, he was probably the least attractive of the 3, and I bought him because he was the only pigeon that had a bit of Herriman in him. I reckon now everything there is Herriman Petrie crossed. So if I buy straight pigeons now, I put them straight into the Petries and cross them. I've definitely moved on that. I think the Petries cross to just about anything from what I've seen, but yeah, it doesn't worry me now if they're not straight when I'm buying them, if they've got the pedigree and the performance behind them.
So down the back, your loft, stock loft in particular, is split into 2 distinct sections.
Yes.
What's the story there?
Well, Richard has the ones he's just spoken about, a lot of the imports, etc. like that. My loft and his birds, we sort of depend on them from go through to 300, although he's got birds that will go beyond that, but that's the main thrust. My loft is birds that will do better from the 300 mile onward. You know, that's the basic premise. I've been very fortunate. I've got a friendship with a very good South Australian flyer who's finishing his flying partnership with Jack Van Linden this year, but Dennis Edwards, and we exchanged a couple of pigeons, or he's gifted me a couple, and when they went real well, we bought some more, and yeah, I'm very impressed with those. They're crossed into what I had here, and they lifted, you know, the further distance and that, you know. The several feds we've won the last couple of years have quite often those birds are involved, you know, either as a cross or direct.
We've got 2 stock lofts because we couldn't agree, let's be honest, and it was either going to be build a second stock loft or I was out, and we feed our stock pigeons different. There's different coverings on the floor, there's different setups, there's different
Perches?
Everything's different in the 2 lofts, to be honest, and I've got my set ideas, and I originally had 7 boxes in Dad's loft, and it just got to the point where it was getting a bit tough, and so I just decided I'd build a second stock loft and do my own thing, and Dad gets very strict instructions on that, and if I come here and there's something in the water that I didn't want in it, or if there's something that I didn't want, we normally have an argument. But yeah, we have 2 very distinct, they're rung with different rings, so that I can tell, you know, which ones are mine. I buy the Australian rings and Dad buys the local Lake Macquarie rings, so we're in the loft, and there's a fair bit of competition between the 2 stock lofts, let me tell you, on a Saturday, so it's pretty quick to point out who's got the first pigeon each week. There's a bit of bragging rights in that. So this is the first lot of race lofts, very different. Got floor covering in this loft, predominantly the imports, a lot of the colours obviously the Vanderbilts, and the blue bar white flights are predominantly the Allen Petrie Herrimans. And then as we come further down, these are more our mid to long distance pigeons. So we've got 18 pairs in here, and these pigeons predominantly, we don't really look for them to start being in the clock till around 300 miles and take us right through. A couple of differences. The reason we have 2 stock lofts, very different setup with the roof, very different setup with the perches, no floor covering. This gets cleaned every day.
and it's just a different setup. I don't know if it makes any difference having the two setups, but we trial both and that seems to work. So
you both do things differently. The lofts are different. So how are the results? Are they different?
As far as the training goes, it's generally up to me because I'm the one here.
Yeah.
Richard's away a lot with his work. He spends a lot of hours work-wise, so he'd have no chance of racing properly at the moment with his work commitments. But when it's up to the training, it's up to me because I'm the one here. Yeah.
So the condition of the birds when they go across, David's the same, to be honest. I don't see too much difference. You know, we were debating years ago, one of us fed pellets and one of us didn't. And, you know, I hated them and I didn't want them and Dad wanted them. And so in his stock loft, he could do what he wanted. But when I look at them at 4 weeks old when we wean them, and I look at them at 8 weeks when we sort of had our first real good check on them, and then when you grab them and you start inoculating them and vaccinating them, I don't see much difference in them, to be honest. But
So you train the same and then the results are the same?
yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, the fact that they're all trained exactly the same. Yeah. This year we'll do a little bit different. We're flying a half a clock this year, so we're flying our main clock and then we're flying a half a clock.
So for people who don't understand, what's a half a clock?
So you can fly half the bird. So we've got a 20
basket.
a half basket for each race. And we're only doing that because we've brought in so many of the Vanderbilts in year one. I don't want to waste 5 years. I really want to test them pretty early, and I want to race them a little bit more like the European style, where they race a bit more consistently or frequently. So that little half basket, we'll probably only race that through to the halfway point, but they'll be raced pretty consistently each week, and we'll just record what happens and see how those particular birds race. So there'll be some racing under the normal system we'd race, where they get plenty of weeks to recover, and there'll be some that are going pretty consistent. So this year will be a bit of a test, and really that half clock's just to fast track 2 years of breeding.
Get more birds away.
So,
you know, like in our federation, you're allowed to send 24, and if you think about it logically, if you're even 100 birds, in reality, that's once every 5 weeks you can get a bird away. That's not on, as far as I'm concerned. Like to condition a pigeon to prepare it for a race, you know. So we like to send his sprinters. He might double them back quite regularly. Whereas if I'm going for more of the distance, I want hammer them as hard as early. You know, they'll get starts and training, but they won't have as many races. You know,
So it just gives us a chance to do something a bit different.
So you'd send them, what, every 2, 3, 4 weeks?
Yeah, every 2, 3, 3 weeks, depending on the bird and its flights and its condition. Yeah, but they might go even surplus to get the hours on the wing that I want for later. Not with the expectation of winning with them, but to condition them up or educate them. Yeah.
I like them going back. I double them back. We have a bit of debate on a Friday night, so I'll often send them back. I reckon if they're in form, I'm not setting them for something in 4 weeks. I'm happy to win tomorrow, so I'll send them back. That's probably our biggest Friday night argument. There's normally a few.
Yeah, but he proved the point with that pigeon we call the champ. She won four straight, and a first, 2 seconds, and a third in the fed. Was pretty damn good effort.
So you're saying he's right?
On that issue. On that particular bird. But it was how it made Marion, who was a good producer, a great
You call them sprinters, but realistically, your birds will still get up to what distance under your breeding methods?
Look, our best distance, we've won the Fed mid-distance average 3 of the last 4 years, and that's probably the distance we targeted. So sort of the 250 to 400.
The mid-distance and the federation average. Yeah, and miles. Yeah. So I'm old style. I know we all race in kilometres, but I learnt the distances when I was younger, and I just know them straight off the top of my head, and I can calculate the time I expect birds to come from the old way.
Realistically, 4 to 600 k's.
Yeah. Look, I personally don't like 2-day races. I think there's too much risk, and they can go into lofts, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But anything up to that all-day fly. So for here, that's sort of 480 miles, so 800 k's on the day. Love it, and think we should fly as many of as we can. But yeah, that 300 miles is what we target, because that's where your feature races are: Breeders' Platers, Young Bird Derbies, Nationals, all sort of in that. Yep. That's the range that we'd like to win.
400 range is what I aim for, and we've been lucky the last few years. Yeah.
And you've done all right at that 500-600 say miles or 800
Well,
kg?
I used to years
You
ago.
still had some all right results recently though.
The last couple of years we haven't, and I'm working hard now to produce some distance pigeons at the moment. I'm still looking for distance pigeons because I used to have them here years ago, but when those birds were stolen, some of those were the distance birds. And I don't think I've got a real lot of good distance pigeons at the moment, but I've got a lot of birds bred for the distance that are in the stock loft now, and it's a big experiment this year, like, you know, but this particular route, I'm not a great lover of it, to be honest. It's a westerly route, and the most predominant wind we have here in the winter time is a westerly, so it's whether it be northwest, southwest, straight west, it's going to be continual fast racing. And that's fine until they go over the mountains. We have some mountains once they get up about 150 miles. Yeah, and once they get beyond that, then suddenly they don't get that assistance wind, or worse still, an adverse wind, and they drop like tea leaves because they haven't got that conditioning, you know. So I dislike this route, but
I think racing's changed. The 600 mile, we used to, everyone got them home, right? You'd send them to Vanderbilt to Newcastle, and you'd get 3 out of 5, you know, most years. It's their homing events now.
I want to tell you a little story about my best pigeon, Gladiator, the Olympic pigeon and national ace bird for my loft. Yeah, that weekend he won the second prize, so he became Olympic pigeon and national ace bird. In the year 2000 I bought a pigeon voicer in the club here from Jules Sampermans, and this was the papa of Tiesto that I bought there. Also we raised this pigeon that we bought as voicer, and he won 2 times the first prize on Bourse. Then we bring him to the breeding loft and he bred us famous pigeon Tiesto.
In 2017 I made my restart in the pigeon sport, and I decided to build my strain around one specific pigeon, Finn, and also of course his parents. So my second base pigeon in the loft is Ricky. Ricky is related as well to Finn because the mother and himself are cousins. Ricky was my first national ace pigeon since I raced with the pigeons in 2014, and he was also very successful the years afterwards, so he was 3 years in a row in the top 6 in the PIPA ranking on the long distance races.
I started with my own birds in a small loft in 1995. It was a loft by 2 by 2 only. I lived with my mother. It was for me also easy to get into the sport in a short period. Good pigeons also, because we were related to several guys who flew on a high level. The most famous name was of course the Huben family. 2004, Queen L, our basic hen, she won first national on La Souterraine. Was about 600 kilometers. She was fastest against 19,000 pigeons, all birds and young birds together.
Ik ben Nicolas Gijzelbrecht en ben gestart met PIPA in 2000 als nieuwswebsite. En in 2008 ben ik dan begonnen in het klein met PIPA Elite Center. Dat was met een koppeltje duiven en dat één koppeltje zijn dan meerdere koppels geworden. En in de loop van de jaren zijn we zo wel geëvolueerd. Beslist hebben met ons 3 dat een duif maar verkocht mag worden als wij vinden dat die goed genoeg is voor onszelf, voor de eigen kweek.
top shelf has been probably a foundation cock in here. Like, you know, he's been an incredible producer for us. He's crossed between him and Kirsten and Alan Petrie, and come from Rod Simmons' loft. And he was a very henny-headed little cock when we got him as a yearling, and he was bought as a hen, but turned out to be a cock. But he didn't get sent back, and thank God we didn't. He's sire and grandsire of a string of pigeons. Wonderful cock. If you had to pick on conformation, never pick him as a champion.
Well, his back wing is normal. That's exactly normal, right? That's all the European pigeons are exactly that.
Yep.
100%. Then normally all the European pigeons, I did the same thing, and normally it goes to that knuckle there. So that's he's absolutely typical of all the European pigeons. Like, absolutely one for one.
Yeah.
And they're all that ratio. I picked up 1,000 pigeons we were in Europe, and every single one lines up absolutely to that.
But he produces lovely pigeons.
Well, he's obviously got it under the
Winning pigeons too.
he's obviously got it under the bonnet.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, Richard, you tell us about Maid Marian to introduce it.
This is the pigeon.
The daughter of Maid Marian, that one.
Yeah, take that one.
Right?
Take that one and grab Maid Marian. So this is a hen we call the Champ. She's a direct daughter of Maid Marian. She was probably the best hen we raced in 2019. This hen had 5 starts that year. She was our trap pigeon 4 times. She won 4 outright combines, racing against between 400 and 500 pigeons a time, and she ran first, second and third fed, racing against probably 1,200 pigeons a time. Her nestmate sister was also in the clock twice to win 2 combines, and she ran second and third in the fed, and I've sold her to a good friend. But this would be one of the best hens we've ever raced, and the good thing about this hen is last year we paired her up to a pigeon called Secret Blend, who was an Alan Petrie cross as well, and they produced us a little hen that we trapped 3 times, and she was nominated for an Australian Journal Pigeon of the Year, and she got an Ace Pigeon Award, and she took 3 prizes in the top 5% of the fed, so really happy with her first year in stock, so that's the champion.
That's Maid Marian. She's been a champion producer for us. Once again, she's I think a straight Alan Petrie, this one, and which I believe are Jansen based. You'd tell me more about that, Rob, but she's been a cracker for us. And at the last, in 2019, we won 17 out of the 23 combine wins, and she was directly responsible for 6, whereas top shelf, the previous bird, was either sire or grandsire of 11 out of the 17. That's how dominant that pair are. And this year we paired them together just for stock purposes, and we bred out the babies now, and we'll see how they race this year.
This is one of the imported Vanderbilts that we've just brought in. So this is a direct son of Brat, and Brat's the nestmate of Gold Dust, who's probably the most famous Vanderbilt hen. So we've only bought this boy in last year. It's the first year we've bred with him. We paired him up to the Champ, who's the hen that was previously here. So we've brought in a number of the direct Vanderbilts, and we've also got a number of pigeons that were bred here in stock now. And this year we've basically put every pair of pigeons has Vanderbilt and Petrie Harriman in them, so every single one of my 12 pairs is a cross with Vanderbilt in it, so we'll know within probably one season whether we've got the right stuff or not. This is another one of the Vanderbilts, pretty consistent. We've got a lot of the blue pieds in this family. So this is a cock that's directly down out of a daughter of Gold Dust. So this guy is a grandson of Gold Dust. Again, first year in stock for us. He's a bit bigger pigeon than what we would normally have, so we've paired him to some of the smaller hens, but really hopeful that this bloke can leave his mark in the loft within the next 6 to 12 months. And we bought a lot of pigeons bred around the same line. This is the last of the Vanderbilts I'll look at today. This guy is a grandson of Banksy. So Timmy Fairfax has the only son of Banksy in Australia, and we did a bit of co-breeding. So I sent up a hen that was a granddaughter of Kittle, and we co-bred and we got a pigeon each. So this is only a yearling cock that we've just put into the stock loft, and we're going to breed around this cock and this line this year and really see how they go. So this is another one of the Allen Petrie Herriman crosses. We bought this at Winners One sale in Sydney, this pigeon, under the Rod recommended that I buy this cock. Very closely bred to Top Shelf. His mother is Top Shelf's grandmother, Sylvania. So he's out of a direct import Herriman and a direct import Allen Petrie. This guy has produced us a Fed winner every single year that we've had him. He's been a fantastic cock for us. He's very consistent. He's produced a lot of good race pigeons for us, and he's fairly typical of the Allen Petrie / Herrimans. He's a little bit smaller, and he's got a little bit of temperament. We used to call him the Poofter cock when he first arrived because he was an absolute nightmare. I reckon this guy cost me about 12 eggs the first year he was here. He didn't just want one box, he wanted 8. We finally got him sorted, and from then on he's been great, but I nearly had to get rid of him because he was just so dominant in the loft, and I'd never seen a pigeon quite like him. And I think we nearly flogged him to death a couple of times trying to get him to stop going into other boxes, but settled down now and we worked out what he wanted, and yeah, he's been a fantastic producer for us, very consistent with the pigeons that we're racing for the last 3 or 4 years.
Like now, I usually put the bird's number down, what it's out of, then it starts, and where it's run, and if we lose them or whatever, crossed out. And,
you give them an average result.
Yep.
At the end of the year.
I can look at the end of the year and say, boom. What a very good little blue hen. How you pick up things with a good blue hen.
The Australian Racing Pigeon Journal has been an interesting educational read since 1993 and still a significant way to keep abreast of the sport of pigeon racing. In each exciting monthly magazine, editor Jeff Howe brings together Australian and international articles. Join pigeon fanciers throughout the world who subscribe and enjoy the Australian Racing Pigeon Journal. Loft visits, training tips, pigeon strains, as well as health advice from world-renowned avian veterinarians are regular topics featured in this great read. There is nothing better than keeping a quality magazine on the shelf to read anytime.
A few weeks ago we had Colin Walker in the studio. We continue tonight's show with that interview.
Colin, can you over-medicate? And is there any advantages, or could you poison the pigeons?
Look, I think that really is a double-barreled question. There's two issues to address there. One is that all medication should be used at the correct dose. Most drugs in overdose potentially can do harm, even drugs that are quite commonly used, like doxycycline. Doxycycline in overdose, is potentially damaging to the liver. So, dose rate should always be followed. But then again, as far as the other side is whether that medication should be given in the first place or not. And some fanciers tend to get confused between good management practices, correct management of the birds as they're maturing, and then medication. I think ideally all medication should be given in response to veterinary advice. Not always possible to take the birds to a vet, but at least these days emails can be sent, pictures can be sent, and the phone's always there as well. So that's a fairly complex issue, but I think dose rates obviously need to be followed, and medication needs to be given under veterinary guidance and not overly relied on or used to replace just basic good management.
Colin, now coming on to the breeding season, what should people be doing in preparation? How far out from breeding? And is there anything they should look at for the medicating side of it, or just general feeding?
Sure, that's a very good question. It's a big question. It's a lot to cover as well. Look, I don't think it's a matter of course people should medicate for canker or respiratory infection or chlamydia or anything like that coming up to racing. Some lofts there is an indication for that, but that's very much an individual loft thing and needs to be done under veterinary supervision. I think going into breeding, what you need to do is essentially just make sure your birds are parasite free and they're fully vaccinated as well. So vaccination, everyone's familiar with that, just rota, PMV, salmonella and pox, that needs to be done. It's very hard to do properly once the birds are vaccinated. With your parasites, it's really just worms, coccidia, lice and mites. And so there's a range of proprietary preparations that are available, very effective, very safe, that you can just put your birds through, give them a wormer, treat them for coccidia, and then any of the common things that are used for lice and mites, and then just pair them up. Diet is very important, particularly calcium in the hens. A lot of things a lot of medical problems that Australian fanciers accepted as normal historically, we're realising now have a nutritional base. So egg binding, soft-shelled eggs, hens not being able to produce winning babies after about 6 years of age, cocks, becoming sterile at 8 years of age, arthritic changes, obesity, hernias, fat-based tumours, all of those things to some extent have a nutritional base. And of course another thing I nearly overlooked is kidney disease, which is going to be associated with a vitamin A deficiency. Historically, fanciers used to just feed grain blends, maybe they'd have some supplements. When I started racing, pigeons were bred on peas and grit, and just incredible really. I'm rather sold on the maintenance pellets that my company, and there's other companies that produce pellets as well. As we were talking earlier, the nutritional requirements of pigeons are exactly known now, and so pellets can be produced that contain every nutrient in just the right amount, and perfect nutrition, and a lot of those problems that we used to experience earlier just don't occur. Just as an example, I'm sure I'm no great exception here, but I had a couple of hens this year that are 2006 rung that just laid three rounds of eggs and laid like 4 out of those 6, weaned those 4 out of those 6 eggs. So hens in particular with calcium, important that they have free access to nutritious food containing calcium and at least a calcium supplement throughout the whole year. No matter how much calcium they have while they're actually breeding, they can't eat and assimilate into their system the amount of calcium to match the amount of calcium that they're putting out in the crop milk and the eggs. They make up the difference by mobilising calcium that's been pre-stored in the skeleton prior to pairing. So it's like a calcium bank. And then after the breeding season finishes, if they're fed properly and provided the correct supplements, that calcium in the skeleton that's been depleted is gradually built up again, so that by the time they're paired again the following year, the calcium's ready to go. So important that the diet is correct, and these days, I'm recommending more and more pellets. My own stock birds have eaten nothing except pellets for about 15 years. The only times they have something else is if I just run out of pellets. They haven't been up to my factory for a while, and I'll give them some of the race bird mix for a day or two, but essentially just the pellets. And so make sure the diet's right, and really just parasite free and vaccination. So another point to consider is just how heavy, how fat, should a pigeon be when it's paired up. Ideally, a race bird, if it's fed pellets, you'll be surprised that it'll actually handle like a race bird. Fat birds aren't necessarily healthy, and they're not actually in that good condition. They're just fat, and if they have a lot of internal fat, you could run into problems like difficulty with egg laying and the cock's difficulty in mating and things like that. But at the same time, you don't want the pigeons too skinny, because they need plenty of energy in reserve, ready to to raise those babies. So I guess fairly challenging to get them just the right weight at pairing. You don't want to sort of, if they're fat, reduce their general body condition by feeding less food, or by feeding or basing a diet on a very poorly balanced diet, like you people just substituting 30% of the grain mix with barley or something. So you're providing a poorly balanced, non-nutritious diet just before the time when the pigeons have the highest nutritional demand. So quite challenging, I think, to get the pigeons just at the right weight, where you're trying to do that with grain and supplements. It can be done, obviously, but I find it easy just to use the pellets, and then everything's perfect. The pigeons won't get fat, and they'll be full and toned, and have plenty of energy for breeding, but they won't become fat.
Colin, if someone wants to get in contact with your factory, they want to buy some supplements,
Sure.
pellets, medications, vaccines, how do they go about doing that?
You get to speak to the wonderful Laura, and so look, Laura's there from 9 to 5 days a week, and you can place an order just by phoning her or emailing her, and just Google Australian Pigeon Company, and all the contact details are there. And Laura's very familiar, very experienced, and she'll be happy to look after you.
Thanks for watching tonight's show, and good night, David.
Good night, Rod. Good night, viewers. And for those who started racing, good luck, good racing and good returns.
I'm Rod Simmons. You've been watching Pigeon Racing World with Winners One. Good night.